Tonight, we drift through the 1800s to explore inventions so unnecessary that even their inventors probably fell asleep halfway through explaining them. The screen fades in soft and slow, like the curtain lifting on a very long play you might not stay awake for. You hear the faint scratch of a quill, a clock ticking in the distance, and the lazy shuffle of footsteps across wooden floors. You are here in the 19th century, though don't worry, you won't be expected to do much. Mostly you'll just watch, and maybe yawn. This is a story about the most unnecessary inventions of the 1800s, and you probably won't make it through this day without at least nodding off once. That's fine. In fact, it's encouraged. Before we begin, let's make a small modern request. If you're enjoying this slow and sleepy stroll through the useless side of history, do gently tap the like button and maybe even subscribe so you don't miss future nights of boredom disguised as education. And if you're awake enough, leave a comment with your location and the time on your clock right now. It's oddly soothing to know who else is out there, trying not to think about their inbox. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You are walking along a cobblestone street somewhere in London in the year 1840. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and yesterday's bread. Carriages rattle by at an unhurried pace, though the horses seem more focused on sighing than running. A man in a tall hat tips it at you, not out of courtesy, but because the hat is so heavy it constantly slips forward. Fashion, after all, is just another invention, only marginally more useful than what we're here for tonight. The world of the 1800s was bursting with ideas. The Industrial Revolution had filled the air with gears, wheels, and steam, and suddenly, everyone wanted to invent something. Some of these inventions changed the world. Locomotives, telegraphs, light bulbs. And then, there were others. The inventions that seemed clever for about 5 minutes, until everyone realized they solved problems that nobody actually had. Take, for example, the anti-garrote collar patented in the 1850s. Garroting, a kind of street robbery involving strangling, was a moral panic in Victorian London. People imagined they could be attacked at any moment, which was unlikely but excellent for newspaper sales. One inventor decided to solve this by designing a metal collar hidden under your cravat, complete with spikes that would jab the hands of anyone who tried to strangle you. Which meant, yes, you walked around looking like a fashionable porcupine disguised as a banker. Historians still debate whether anyone ever actually wore one, or whether the whole contraption just lived forever in dusty catalogs of forgotten patents. As you pass by a shop window, you see it displayed there, gleaming faintly under the lamplight. Imagine adjusting it politely at dinner, leaning forward to sip your soup, and accidentally puncturing the tablecloth. Safety, yes. Practicality, not so much. And yet, there's a strange comfort in these kinds of devices. They remind you that people have always worried about improbable dangers, like Victorians fearing garroting, while you mostly worry about your Wi-Fi cutting out during a meeting. Some things change, some don't. Down the street, you hear a vendor hawking his wares. Collapsible top hats, ideal for sitting in theaters where your towering headgear might otherwise block the view. A hat that could be flattened like a pancake and popped back up again with a flick of the wrist. Useful? Perhaps. But the real flaw was that it made people so fidgety with the springy mechanism that performances became less about Shakespeare and more about impromptu hat gymnastics. Remember this street. You'll be back. For now, your eyes grow a little heavy with the soft lamplight, the clatter of hooves, and the absurd realization that humanity has always been very good at inventing solutions for problems that barely existed. And somehow you're still awake. Or maybe not. You continue your stroll, though now the street curves into a quieter lane, where the shops specialize in things even fewer people asked for. It is evening, and a soft drizzle falls, making the gas lamps blur into halos. You smell damp wool coats, pipe smoke, and something faintly metallic, perhaps from yet another invention rusting in the rain. Here you encounter one of the true gems of pointless ingenuity, the revolving desk for the indecisive worker. Patented in the 1870s, this contraption allowed a person to surround themselves with multiple writing surfaces, each one ready for a different project. With a spin, you could move from poetry to bookkeeping to letter writing, all without getting up. The idea was productivity. The reality was dizziness. People joked that the desk was less about efficiency and more about creating a slow carousel for adults who wanted to feel important while going nowhere. You touch its polished wood, running your hand across ink stains left by some overly ambitious clerk. Imagine sitting there at midnight, resolving to finally finish your grand novel, only to spin away into tax receipts and never come back. Scholarly debates remain uncertain whether anyone ever truly found it useful, or if it simply became the world's most elaborate coat rack. Across the lane is another curiosity, the Tempest Prognosticator, also known as the Leech Barometer. Invented in 1851, it used live leeches in glass bottles to predict storms. The theory was that leeches grew restless when atmospheric pressure changed, and so when the leeches squirmed, a bell would ring. An entire scientific display, built upon slimy creatures ringing a bell like tiny, reluctant meteorologists. The inventor, George Merriweather, presented it proudly at the Great Exhibition, describing the leeches as devoted servants of humanity. Historians still debate whether this was brilliance or just eccentric Victorian theater. Either way, it did not catch on. People preferred simpler barometers, perhaps because they didn't wriggle around at the dinner table. As you watch the drizzle slide down the lamplight glass, you hear the faint clink of a bell in the distance. Somewhere in this imagined lane, a leech has done its civic duty. You wonder if modern weather apps, with all their satellite data, are really that much more dignified. You stop at a small tea shop, its window fogged from the warmth inside. On display, there's an advertisement for the treadmill-powered butter churner, a contraption designed to let small dogs walk on a wheel, turning cream into butter. The result was less a time saver and more a confused terrier staring at dairy that refused to cooperate. The invention lingered briefly until someone realized you could just use your arms. Imagine explaining to your neighbors that your butter depends on the mood of your dachshund. Not exactly reliable. And yet, these inventions carry a peculiar charm. They tell you that the 1800s were not only about railways and empires, but also about everyday absurdities. People tinkering in workshops, convinced they were solving something important, when really they were just making history's longest list of unused gadgets. The rain falls heavier now. You tuck your coat tighter, hearing the street behind you fade into puddles and the soft squelch of boots. Remember that revolving desk. You might wish you had it later, when the story itself starts circling in sleepy loops. For now, you wander further into the dim lane, where more oddities await, as inevitable and unnecessary as the daydreams of inventors who couldn't quite let go of their big ideas. Your eyelids grow heavier, but the story, like the rain, keeps drifting on. You find yourself turning a corner, and suddenly the city quiets. The drizzle fades, replaced by the gentle hush of fog that drapes itself over the street like a blanket. Your boots make a soft tap against cobblestones as you enter a district where shopkeepers seem to specialize in curiosities even more peculiar than the leech-powered barometer or the spinning desk. If the last lane felt eccentric, this one feels like history's forgotten attic. In the first dimly lit window, you notice a device called the pedometer cane, patented around the mid-1800s. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary gentleman's walking stick. Polished wood, a brass handle, a sturdy shaft for leaning upon while making witty remarks about the weather. But inside the shaft, a delicate mechanism that counted your steps. Yes, people in the 1800s were already obsessing over step counts, long before fitness apps nagged you about 10,000 a day. The difference was that Victorians had no way to set goals or brag online, so the cane's tally remained mostly a private curiosity. Some thought it would encourage rational exercise. Others just thought it was a good way to confirm that, yes, walking from your chair to the teapot does indeed count as movement. Historians still debate whether the pedometer cane was taken seriously or mostly sold as a polite joke among gentlemen with too much leisure time. You imagine yourself strolling through Hyde Park, elegantly dressed, tapping the cane on gravel paths. Each step adds to the count, yet no one really knows what the number is for. Do you compare it to yesterday? Do you shout it at your neighbor across the hedge? Or do you simply nod with satisfaction, having proof that you have moved more than zero? Just down the street sits a shop specializing in comfort. The display item is both earnest and ridiculous. The mechanical leech. Medicine in the 1800s adored leeches. They were the cure for everything from headaches to fevers, or so physicians thought. But leeches were messy, wiggly, and inconvenient. Enter the mechanical version, a small, spring-loaded contraption meant to imitate the suction of a leech without, the slimy part. One doctor declared it a civilized improvement on nature. Patients, however, were less convinced. Imagine sitting in a clinic while your physician straps a tiny brass gadget onto your arm and insists it's just as good as the real thing. Ironically, real leeches often worked better. Humanity, it seems, can't always out-engineer the worm. The fog thickens, softening the lamps into golden halos. Somewhere nearby, a bell tower strikes the hour, slow and resonant. You pass a group of men gathered in heated discussion about a new idea, trousers with built-in life preservers. That's right, inflatable pants. Perfect for the gentleman who feared falling overboard during a canal trip. They were supposed to puff up around the hips, keeping you afloat until help arrived. Of course, the problem was activating them. You could never be quite sure whether you'd inflate properly in the water or worse while sitting at dinner. Scholarly uncertainty lingers about whether these trousers were ever manufactured beyond prototypes, though one suspects they might have been the talk of a particularly adventurous tailor. You picture it now. A Victorian picnic by the river, a man slipping slightly off the boat, trousers swelling like a balloon, and everyone pretending it's perfectly normal. Because nothing says dignity like bobbing helplessly in trousers that double as a life buoy. As you walk on, the fog curls tighter, like the world itself wants to sleep. You think back to the revolving desk from earlier, how it spun in pointless circles. Now, the inventions themselves seem to be circling too, each one an echo of some human hope that never quite made it to usefulness. Perhaps that's the real charm. These things exist not because they were needed, but because people dreamed them up anyway, convinced that their afternoon tinkering might just make the world easier. Instead, it made history funnier and sleepier. The fog clears a little as you step into a marketplace. Stalls line the square, lanterns glowing faintly against the twilight. Merchants here call out in gentle tones, offering wares that no one quite seems to want. The square feels less like commerce and more like a collective experiment in optimism. Front and center is an invention that deserves applause simply for existing. The carriage alarm hat. Patented in the 1870s, it was designed for pedestrians fearful of being run over by horse-drawn vehicles. How did it work? Well, the hat had a tall pole sticking straight up, tipped with a small flag or bell. The idea was that drivers of carriages would see you more clearly. The flaw? Instead of preventing collisions, it mostly made wearers look like migrating signposts. Some hats had actual bells that jingled as you walked, which might have alerted the horse but also announced your presence like a one-person parade. Historians still debate whether this device saved lives or simply ruined afternoons with excessive clanging. Across the square, a stall advertises the ventilating top hat, another marvel of misplaced effort. Gentlemen often complained that top hats grew unbearably warm, especially in crowded theaters or during summer strolls. The solution: tiny fans or even tubes designed to circulate air through the hat. Some were hand-cranked, meaning you had to subtly spin a mechanism on your head during conversation. Others relied on the breeze, which is charming if you happen to be standing on a hill but less effective in a smoky tavern. The result? A hat that whistled faintly as you sweated anyway. And then, tucked between two stalls selling tea and candlesticks, you find a true delight: the combination knife and fork spoon, otherwise known as an early attempt at the spork. This one, however, went further. It folded out into multiple utensils at once, as if dinner required the dexterity of a Swiss Army knife. People imagined it would be convenient for travelers, soldiers, or picnickers. Instead, it mostly pinched fingers and confused diners, who wondered whether they were meant to stab, scoop, or slice first. You pick it up, feel the weight of its clunky steel, and can't help smiling. It's the ancestor of your plastic takeaway spork, proving that useless inventions sometimes survive, only to reappear centuries later in fast food restaurants. The market hums with low conversation, muffled by the night air. You overhear a man praising his self-rocking cradle, a mechanism meant to soothe babies automatically. It used gears and pendulums to sway gently without a parent's touch. The pitch was convenience, the reality was unpredictability. Sometimes rocking too hard, sometimes refusing to rock at all, and occasionally tipping the infant into an alarming angle. Mothers, unsurprisingly, trusted their own arms more than any rattling contraption. You notice the baby in question snoring peacefully in a blanket, while the cradle sits untouched in the corner. That, perhaps, is the truest image of this era. The dream of replacing effort with machines, and the constant reminder that effort has its own quiet necessity. The lanterns flicker as the market winds down. A fiddler plays a slow tune in the distance. You walk past the stalls, hearing echoes of inventions past. The jangling bell hat, the whirring ventilated top hat, the clatter of folding utensils. And you think again of that first street, the spiked collars, the collapsible hats, how each street seems to echo back the others, repeating variations of the same theme. Human creativity chasing convenience, only to find comedy. Your steps slow, the air cool, your eyes heavy. The inventions grow sillier, but the rhythm of their stories is gentle, like the rocking cradle, steady, imperfect, but soothing all the same. The night deepens, and you keep walking. The road winds out of the market and into a quieter quarter of town, where the houses lean at odd angles, and the gas lamps flicker like they're running out of patience. You hear the soft creak of a sign swinging above a narrow shop door. Painted letters read, "Scientific Marvels and Domestic Aids," which, as you've learned by now, usually translates to objects that nobody needed but someone patented anyway. Inside, the shelves are lined with glass domes, polished brass, and wooden cases. The first thing that catches your eye is the writing stabilizer for shaky hands. In an age when handwriting was everything, your reputation, your business, your love letters, it was a source of great anxiety to scribble too fast or too messy. So one inventor designed a frame to hold your pen steady, complete with weights and guides. In theory, this created flawless copperplate script. In practice, it made your hand feel like it was shackled to a tiny prison. Some critics noted that it slowed writing down so much that, by the time you finished one letter, your friend might have already shown up at your door. Historians still debate whether the stabilizer was truly marketed for practical use or mainly displayed in shops to impress anxious clerks. You imagine yourself at a mahogany desk, pen strapped into the contraption, producing the neatest "Dear Sir" in history, and then promptly giving up halfway through the letter because your tea has gone cold. On the next shelf sits something stranger still, the coffin alarm system. Yes, Victorians were deeply worried about being buried alive, a fear so widespread that entire industries sprang up to soothe it. This device attached a cord to the deceased's hand, leading up through the coffin lid to a small bell above ground. If you happened to wake up mid-burial, you could tug the cord, ring the bell, and hopefully be rescued. Some models even included a small tube for air and a speaking trumpet for conversation with passersby. The flaw? Bells rang constantly from shifting soil, squirrels, or simple rope tension, leading gravekeepers into nightly panics. Imagine taking a moonlit stroll past a cemetery and hearing bells tinkle in every direction. Comforting? Not exactly. As you step further into the shop, you notice another curious display: the adjustable dining table for invalids. The Victorians loved furniture that folded, tilted, or slid into different shapes. This table claimed to improve digestion by allowing the diner to eat while reclining at an angle, rather like an improvised hospital bed. The result was less improved digestion and more spilled soup. One newspaper of the day dryly noted that comfort was hardly achieved by a lapful of gravy. The shopkeeper dozes in the corner, head tilted back, as though lulled to sleep by his own inventory. You hear the faint tick of a clock, the soft hum of rain outside, and the almost comical determination of an era that believed every discomfort could be engineered away. As you step outside, you glance back at the shelves. The coffin bell, the stabilizer, the tilting table. They all gleam faintly in the lamplight, little ghosts of optimism. Remember them, because in some odd way, they will follow you through the rest of this night. The air is cooler now. The fog has thinned, and you walk on through streets that seem quieter than before, as though the city itself has decided to rest. You wander further down the cobbled lanes until you find yourself in a square where inventors gather to display their latest improvements to daily life. The stalls are fewer than the bustling marketplace earlier, but somehow the objects here feel even more unnecessary. One of the first inventions you see is the umbrella with a built-in pipe holder. Victorians adored umbrellas, and they adored smoking pipes. One inventor, in a rare flash of ambition, decided to combine them. The umbrella handle was fitted with a pipe stem, so you could smoke while sheltering from the rain. Ingenious in theory, ridiculous in practice. The smoke drifted back into your face. The rain often dripped into the bowl, and the whole device had the unfortunate look of a gentleman accidentally setting fire to his umbrella. Historians remain uncertain whether it was ever marketed beyond prototypes. You can imagine the advertisements. Never go without your smoke, even in the heaviest downpour, though most users probably went without both. Next to it, you notice the self-tipping hat. This contraption used a hidden spring so that, with a small tug on a cord, your hat would automatically tip forward in a perfect gesture of politeness. It was meant to impress ladies or dignitaries without requiring the effort of lifting your arm. Unfortunately, the spring sometimes misfired, leading to hats flinging themselves across the street or nodding repeatedly like a very eager pigeon. One can only imagine the embarrassment of a man whose hat tipped continuously during church. A few steps away is the candle extinguisher clock. At the stroke of bedtime, a mechanical arm descended slowly over your bedside candle and pinched out the flame. Elegant, yes, but the mechanism sometimes acted prematurely, plunging readers into darkness mid-sentence. Other times, it hesitated for hours, leaving the candle to sputter dangerously low. One scholar remarked that the clock extinguishes all things but anxiety. The square is quieter than the markets, filled with the murmurs of curious onlookers who aren't quite convinced. You overhear a man explaining his latest prototype, the pocket-sized birdcage. Designed for traveling canaries, it was little more than a collapsible wire cube. Birds, however, did not appreciate being folded into luggage. Few were surprised when the idea never caught on. A fiddler plays in the distance again, the same one you heard back in the marketplace, only now his song is slower, almost like a lullaby. You pause to listen, leaning against a lamppost. The inventions around you blur into one another. The umbrella pipe, the tipping hat, the anxious candle clock. They are as silly as they are endearing, products of a century that believed machines could make even courtesy and bedtime easier. And yet, as you stand there, the air cool and the music soft, you realize something. People in every century make the same mistake. They assume technology will replace small gestures. Lifting a hat, snuffing a candle, holding an umbrella, when really those gestures are half the charm of being alive. Perhaps that's why you smile at the absurdity. The fiddler tune fades. You walk on, hearing the gentle slap of your boots against the stones, feeling your eyelids grow heavier with each unnecessary contraption you pass. The night stretches on, and the inventions, like the stories themselves, become a rhythm, steady, strange, and soothing. The night has deepened now, the streets washed silver by moonlight, and you drift into yet another neighborhood, a quieter, residential one this time. Curtains are drawn, lamplight spills weakly through fogged glass, and the air is heavy with the scent of coal smoke and bread long since baked. Here, the inventions aren't flashy displays for exhibitions, but small contraptions meant for the home, often dreamt up by people who believed life was a series of problems only gears and springs could fix. You pause outside a narrow townhouse where the parlor window is half open, and there you catch a glimpse of the patent mechanical bedmaker. Its inventor, frustrated with messy sheets, designed a contraption of pulleys and rollers that could, at the pull of a lever, tug the sheets up and smooth them into place. The problem, of course, was precision. The machine was as likely to wrap the sleeper inside the sheets like a cabbage roll as it was to tuck anything neatly. Children, predictably, found this hilarious and would dare one another to pull the lever while someone was still in bed. Historians still debate whether the invention ever reached market or simply existed in one poor household, folding and refolding itself into legend. Further down the lane, you pass a doorway where another curiosity sits: the fire escape suit. Essentially a canvas sack with a rope attached, it allowed residents of tall buildings to slide safely down from windows in case of fire. Unfortunately, the design did not account for friction burns, tangled ropes, or the sheer panic of dangling in a sack halfway between floors. The Victorian press had a field day mocking it, pointing out that the suit seemed better suited for lowering baskets of laundry than terrified humans. Still, you imagine the inventor earnestly testing it from his own second-story window, neighbors peering out with a mix of concern and amusement. And then, there is the invention that makes you stop and stare: the whiskered teapot. Yes, you heard correctly. Victorians had a problem. Tea leaves that escaped into the cup and tickled their lips. One genius decided to fit a teapot spout with a small brush of bristles. Tiny whiskers meant to catch stray leaves before they poured out. Elegant in theory, absurd in execution. The bristles stained quickly, caught more liquid than leaves, and gave the impression that the teapot was growing a mustache. Needless to say, it did not revolutionize tea time. The houses around you are silent, the streets so hushed that your own footsteps sound too loud. You think back to earlier inventions, the coffin bell, the revolving desk, and realize there is a strange thread connecting them all. Fear, comfort, efficiency, dignity. Every device is a small attempt at making life a little less awkward, even if the result was often far more awkward instead. You pause at the end of the lane, listening to the muffled tick of a clock from somewhere inside a house. The sound is steady, soft, almost hypnotic. Another useless invention waits just ahead, and you, heavy-eyed, keep walking toward it. The road now leads into a part of town where inventors gather in taverns, fueled by ale and optimism. The buildings are older here, the timber beams leaning, the windows patched with uneven glass. You step inside one such tavern, drawn by the warm glow and the promise of stories. At a table near the hearth sits a man demonstrating his pride and joy: the pocket-warming stove. Roughly the size of a large book, it was designed to be strapped inside your coat, fueled by coal or heated bricks. In theory, it allowed one to brave even the coldest days in comfort. In practice, it roasted the wearer from the inside, occasionally singeing their clothing. Reports of scorched waistcoats were common enough that the invention quietly disappeared from polite society. Yet here, in the tavern, the man boasts about it with flushed cheeks, perhaps warmed by his own device, or simply by drink. In the corner, another man argues passionately about the merits of the automatic chess player's companion. This was not the famous mechanical Turk automaton, but a far more modest contraption meant to remind amateur players of possible moves. Using a series of weighted squares, it could nudge a piece when opportunities were detected. The flaw was obvious. It nudged at the wrong times, often encouraging disastrous moves. One critic dryly noted that the companion plays more faithfully for your opponent than for you. Historians remain uncertain whether anyone actually bought one or whether it stayed forever in smoky backrooms like this one. A woman at the bar mentions another curiosity: the rainproof bonnet with eyeglass wipers. Yes, it existed. A bonnet fitted with small lenses and tiny brushes, designed so that ladies wearing spectacles would not suffer fog or drizzle obscuring their view. Imagine sitting under the drizzle, a bonnet clicking gently as miniature brushes swished across your vision. Charming if you wish to look like a blinking automaton. The fashion-conscious, unsurprisingly, passed on this one. The tavern grows louder, yet you feel yourself sinking deeper into a kind of sleepy rhythm. Each invention is another odd note in the symphony of unnecessary ideas. The warmth of the fire, the low drone of voices, the steady tap of mugs on tables. It all blends into a lullaby. As you sit there, you can't help remembering the street you walked earlier, with its jingling carriage hats and umbrella pipes. The inventions feel like old companions now, circling back in memory. They are not just objects. They are fragments of human hope, each one a little absurd, each one strangely touching. The fire cracks. A log shifts. Someone snores softly at the far end of the tavern. You close your eyes for a moment, not quite asleep, but letting the weight of the centuries settle over you. Outside, the rain begins again, tapping against the tavern window in a rhythm as steady as the tick of that coffin bell you heard in Section 5. And still the night and the inventions go on. The rain has eased into a drizzle as you leave the tavern, and the cobblestones gleam like polished stone under gaslight. You follow the curve of the street toward a marketplace, now nearly empty, though traces of the day's bustle still linger. An overturned basket, a cart left half-covered, the faint smell of roasted chestnuts stubbornly clinging to the air. Here, amid the ghostly echoes of daytime trade, you stumble upon some of the more peculiar household necessities that vendors once swore every family would eventually own. The first is displayed in a cracked shop window, the self-turning spaghetti fork. Imported ideas had reached Europe by the mid-19th century, and pasta was gaining popularity. But twirling noodles was apparently too exhausting for some. This fork, with a tiny crank at its handle, promised to do the job for you. Turn the crank and the fork spun, winding noodles like a miniature windmill. In practice, it tangled hopelessly, flinging sauce in every direction except into the eater's mouth. Imagine a dinner table where someone politely excuses themselves, face speckled with tomato, muttering, "Ah yes, the invention works beautifully." Historians still debate whether the fork was satire or sincere, though both possibilities seem equally likely. Further along, tucked into the stall of a hopeful tinkerer, sits the automatic hat tipper. Etiquette demanded gentlemen tip their hats to ladies and acquaintances. But what if you were too busy? The solution: a spring-loaded mechanism hidden inside the brim, triggered by pressing a button in your pocket. One problem. Sometimes the spring fired unbidden, and hats leapt from heads mid-sentence. Dignity, as you can imagine, was not preserved. It is said one unfortunate man's hat sprang off in church during prayer, an event retold in whispers for weeks. And then, a particularly obscure device, the umbrella with a built-in pipe holder. The logic was straightforward. A gentleman should not have to choose between staying dry and enjoying his smoke. The umbrella's handle included a small metal loop to rest your pipe, allowing you to puff while keeping both hands nominally free. Sadly, the combination of smoke, rain, and the constant threat of ash falling on one's coat made it less than ideal. And let us not even speak of the risks to the umbrella's fabric. Still, one can picture a soggy fellow standing proudly beneath it, convinced he was the pinnacle of modern convenience. The marketplace is hushed, but the inventions seem alive in your imagination. They rattle, clink, and snap in the corners of your mind. You wonder how many shopkeepers went to bed each night dreaming their contraptions would soon fill every home, only to discover that most people preferred forks that didn't spin and hats that stayed firmly in place. The drizzle grows softer. A cat darts across the street, tail arched high, disappearing into shadow. You stand there a moment, letting the sleepy absurdity of the inventions settle over you, before continuing on. You wander now into a quieter quarter of the city, the sort of place where inventors rented cramped rooms above workshops, sketching by candlelight, filling pages with designs that sometimes made sense and sometimes made none at all. The air smells faintly of ink and machine oil, though perhaps that's only in your imagination. Here, the inventions take on a more personal, almost confessional quality, as if each was a diary entry written in brass and wood. The first one you find is propped against a doorway, the mechanical boot scrubber. At a time when mud was unavoidable, this device promised relief. Two bristled rollers, operated by foot pedals, would clean your boots without bending over. You slipped your foot in, pumped the pedals, and let the machine do its work. Unfortunately, it worked too well, often scuffing the leather, scraping stitching, or swallowing laces whole. The result? Boots cleaned of mud but also of dignity. One pamphlet optimistically called it civilization's answer to dirt, though civilization seemed unimpressed. Inside the workshop, another creation rests on a shelf, the safety fan for ladies. Picture a handheld fan, the kind used at balls and parlors, but fitted with a protective wire cage and tiny gears. Its purpose? To fan more efficiently while keeping hair and ribbons safe from stray drafts. Yet the cage rattled, the gears squeaked, and the fan weighed nearly as much as a small cat. The elegance of a graceful wrist flick was replaced with the awkward heft of lugging machinery through a waltz. Romantic? Hardly. And then, tucked beneath a stack of discarded sketches, lies the most curious of all, the illuminated dog collar. A simple concept: attach a tiny lantern to a dog's collar so it could be seen at night. It might have been useful, except that dogs, being dogs, shook their heads, bolted through streets, and sent their small lanterns flying. The effect was less reassuring beacon of safety and more tiny comets hurtling through the dark. Still, there is something touching about it. An owner's worry turned into invention, even if it lit up the wrong things entirely. As you look around the workshop, you notice the scattered remains of other prototypes. Half-built contraptions, loose cogs, smudged diagrams. You realize most of these never saw daylight, let alone market stalls. They are the forgotten children of ingenuity, too impractical even for satire. Yet, somehow they feel more honest than the grand exhibitions, more human than the polished displays. These were not made to dazzle queens or win prizes, they were made to solve small personal problems. And in their failure, they tell you just as much about the century as its railroads or telegraphs. You step back outside. The night has grown deeper, the sky clouded, the streets nearly deserted. Your breath fogs in the air, and for a moment, the city feels like it belongs only to you and the ghosts of these peculiar inventions. And so you keep walking because, of course, there are always more useless contraptions waiting just around the corner. The lamps along the avenue flicker as you drift into a neighborhood less polished, more patched together. The kind where invention grows out of stubborn necessity and perhaps a touch of delusion. The cobblestones are uneven here, and you nearly trip, though the night cushions you with its silence. A faint smell of coal smoke lingers, clinging to the damp air like an old coat that refuses to be washed. On a wooden table outside a shuttered shop rests the alarm bed. A proud marvel of gears and springs, it was designed not merely to wake you but to quite literally eject you from your dreams. At the appointed hour, the mechanism would tilt the mattress and unceremoniously deposit its occupant on the floor. In theory, it was meant to cure oversleeping. In reality, it simply encouraged resentment toward both the bed and its maker. Imagine the groggy complaints of users, rubbing bruised elbows, muttering, "At least I'm awake." Historians still debate whether these beds were genuinely manufactured or whether they existed only in the fevered imaginations of pamphlet illustrators. Either way, the idea of a device built to betray your trust in the night is oddly fitting for the century. A little farther down, through a cracked doorway, you glimpse another gem, the anti-bandit wallet. This curious contraption involved a series of hidden cords and clasps designed to ensnare a thief's hand if they tried to snatch it. Theoretically clever. Practically, it often tangled its own owner, trapping fingers in straps and forcing embarrassing struggles at the very moment they wished to appear dignified. There's something poetic about an invention that ends up stealing time and patience rather than saving either. And then, displayed proudly as if it were the crown jewel of progress, the child propeller harness. Yes, you heard correctly. Imagine a sort of wearable contraption with wings or tiny sails, designed to exercise children by having them run into the wind. One pamphlet claimed it built stamina and a noble constitution. One can only picture weary mothers watching their children spinning across fields like awkward windmills, sighing as skirts caught the breeze and tears followed shortly after. Today, it would be condemned as both impractical and deeply comical. Then, it was a fleeting promise of modern child-rearing. You lean against a lamp post, taking in the absurd sincerity of it all. These were not jokes to the inventors, they were bold solutions to problems nobody else noticed. And perhaps that is the charm, the courage to look foolish in public pursuit of some imagined convenience. The drizzle has finally stopped. The stones glisten faintly, and you, too, are tilted slightly like the alarm bed, teetering between amusement and sleep. The city grows quieter still as you drift toward the river, its surface a black ribbon stitched with faint reflections of gaslight. The hum of the water is steady, hypnotic, as though the current itself is whispering old stories. And indeed, by the docks, you find yet another cluster of abandoned dreams. Inventions meant to serve travelers, sailors, and the eternally restless. Here lies the portable soup warmer. A tin contraption, small enough to carry, designed to keep broth hot for hours using a delicate chemical reaction. The flaw? The chemicals often misbehaved, boiling too vigorously or failing altogether. Imagine a sailor opening his kit after a long shift, expecting warm comfort, and instead finding lukewarm sludge or, worse, an acrid smell that ruined appetite entirely. And yet, wasn't the impulse a kind one? To carry warmth with you, even on the coldest waters? It is almost touching in its failure. Leaning nearby, rusted and crooked, you spot the self-paddling boat attachment. A framework of gears and paddles affixed to a rowboat, supposedly operated by turning a crank. Row without rowing, the advertisements cried. What they didn't mention was the sheer exhaustion required to operate the crank, which made rowing the traditional way seem preferable. One imagines a passenger sweating profusely, red in the face, while the boat barely moves, stubborn against the current. Still, for a brief moment, someone believed that arms could be spared through the miracle of awkward mechanics. But the strangest device of all rests half submerged in the mud at the river's edge: the floating bathing machine. In the 19th century, modesty demanded that bathers remain unseen as they entered the water. On land, wheeled bathing machines provided privacy. Here, some dreamer thought to create a floating version, a cabin on pontoons, tethered to shore. A bather would step inside, change clothes, and slip into the water unseen. The flaw? Cabins capsized. Gentle dips became humiliating splashes, and the river claimed more than one of these contraptions. Whether they sank in use or drifted free into the current, the effect was the same. A soggy lesson in misplaced priorities. Standing there by the dark water, you hear the faint creak of mooring ropes, the splash of something unseen, perhaps only a fish. You think about how many ideas ended up here, discarded, rusting, sinking, forgotten. And yet the inventors dreamed them earnestly, hoping their names might be remembered. Perhaps that's the real invention of the 1800s. Not the gadgets themselves, but the stubborn human belief that tomorrow, someone would finally say, "Yes, that's useful." The river sighs, the night deepens, and your steps, slower now, carry you farther along this meandering trail of imagination and folly. You wander away from the river, following a quieter street where the fog hangs lower, as though the city itself is weary of invention. Gas lamps glow like tired eyes, their flames fluttering in the damp air. You pass by shuttered shops and cracked windows until you stumble upon a courtyard, cluttered with abandoned prototypes left behind by men who thought they were visionaries. At the center stands the horse-drawing treadmill carriage. Yes, a treadmill for a horse. The idea was simple, if not absurd. Instead of letting horses pull carriages on the street, place them inside the carriage itself, on a moving treadmill, connected to gears that turned the wheels. The horse never left the box. It was thought to be safer, more controlled, even efficient. In practice, horses resisted the treadmill, panicked, or simply refused to move. The whole structure shook and groaned as though it might collapse at any moment. Turns out, horses prefer actual ground, not mechanical trickery beneath their hooves. Nearby leans a peculiar device, the mechanical leecher. In an age when bloodletting still held sway, inventors tried to replace slippery, wriggling leeches with metal imitations powered by suction pumps. It looked like a brass insect, complete with jointed legs and a needle-like mouth. The effect was horrifying even when it worked. Patients often insisted they would rather face real leeches, slimy though they were, than a buzzing brass contraption with a hose. Even the medical journals of the time quietly admitted that the machine, while clever, lacked a certain delicacy. That's one way to put it. And there, on a crooked stool, lies a perpetual pocket warmer. It was a small tin filled with chemicals meant to react indefinitely, keeping hands warm forever, or at least long enough to impress friends. Unfortunately, perpetual it was not. The reaction fizzled after minutes, leaving only a faint chemical smell and disappointment. Still, it sold briefly, perhaps because cold hands make us desperate for hope in any form. You pause in the courtyard, listening to the faint rustle of leaves. The inventors must have stood here too, pitching their devices to disinterested investors, hoping someone would nod with approval. Some must have felt humiliation creeping in as prototypes failed. Others surely laughed at themselves, realizing they had built nothing more than an expensive joke. You smile faintly, because isn't that the essence of progress? To stumble, to fumble, and occasionally to trip headfirst into genius, or at least into a story worth telling. As the night deepens, you drift into a grand hall where relics of domestic innovation gather dust beneath cobwebbed rafters. The hall is silent, save for the occasional creak of timber and the sigh of wind pressing at the shutters. It feels like a museum that no one bothered to catalog, filled with curiosities that failed before they even began. At the front of the hall rests the reading wheel. Imagine a giant, rotating drum designed to hold multiple books at once, allowing the user to switch from one to another by spinning it, like a lazy carousel for literature. It was meant for scholars who couldn't settle on a single text. In reality, it was heavy, clunky, and often trapped the very book one wanted to read. Students reportedly spent more time fiddling with the mechanism than actually studying. Historians still debate whether this contraption was ever widely built, or whether it remained mostly a sketch in the notebooks of overambitious dreamers. Against the far wall sits the vegetable-preserving coffin. The name is not metaphorical. It was literally a coffin-shaped box, lined with ice and salts, intended to keep vegetables fresh during long voyages. Admirable in theory, grim in practice. The resemblance to an actual coffin unsettled travelers, and the vegetables often emerged wilted anyway. Sailors joked that the carrots were given a more dignified burial than some of their comrades. And tucked in a dusty corner you find the mechanical mustache protector. A dainty, clip-on shield meant to keep soup, coffee, or beer foam from clinging to a gentleman's whiskers. Picture a delicate little gate resting across the cup's rim. Useful? Perhaps. Dignified? Not quite. Mustaches survived without it, and the invention disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Still, there's something charming about a century that believed facial hair deserved dedicated engineering. You stroll through the hall, running your hand along rough wooden banisters. You wonder how many late nights were spent polishing these contraptions. How many eager hearts beat faster when a drawing came to life in brass and oak. So much faith, so much effort, all for devices destined to collapse under their own absurdity. And yet, Wouldn't it be dull without them? Outside, the wind has grown softer, carrying with it the faint scent of bread cooling in distant kitchens. The hour is late, and your footsteps echo gently as you leave the hall behind, carrying not a single useful invention, but plenty of stories worth keeping. You step out into the quiet streets once more, the fog now gentler, curling around the lamps like silk scarves draped lazily by unseen hands. The city seems emptied of urgency. The bustle of invention has faded into a drowsy stillness. You walk slowly because by now there is no rush, there never was. The night is yours, and the 1800s, in all their unnecessary cleverness, have already offered their show. The final stop is a small attic workshop, its windows glowing faintly. You climb the narrow stairs and push open the creaking door. Inside, you find shelves lined with forgotten prototypes. A self-rocking baby cradle that only succeeded in waking infants with its jolting rhythm. A portable desk umbrella designed to shield office clerks from imaginary indoor drafts. And in the center of the room, a feather-dusting machine so elaborate it required more dust to operate than it ever removed. Each one a small testimony to human optimism, sometimes misguided, sometimes delightful in its failure. You sit by the window and listen. Outside, a cart rattles over cobblestones. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then settles back into silence. You realize that these inventions, though forgotten, hold their own quiet dignity. They were made not out of malice, but out of an unshakable belief that the world could be improved, even if it couldn't. That belief, however clumsy, is what binds all of us across time. Scholars admit they can't know how many of these inventions were ever truly built, or how many were only dreams scribbled into patent ledgers. But perhaps that doesn't matter. Perhaps their value lies not in their existence, but in the sheer audacity of imagining them. And so, you leave the attic behind, stepping into the tender air of midnight. The street is empty, yet feels alive with the hum of centuries. Every failed gadget, every dusty contraption, has blended into the rhythm of the night. None are useful. All are unforgettable. Now the journey slows. The streets you walked through, the inventions you puzzled over, begin to dissolve into softer shapes, as though drawn in water and brushed gently aside. The city of failed machines fades into mist, leaving only the calm quiet of the present moment. Breathe in slowly, as though you're inhaling the last lamplit glow of the 1800s. Exhale, letting go of rattling gears, crooked handles, and rusting brass. Everything unneeded, everything unnecessary, loosens its grip. You may notice the weight of your body now, resting against the bed or chair that holds you. The surface beneath you is steady, unlike the unstable contraptions of the past. Your breathing is even as sure and reliable as any invention could ever dream to be. In your mind, the useless gadgets lie quietly, like toys forgotten in an attic trunk. They are no longer clanking or rattling, they are simply still. The reading wheel no longer spins. The treadmill carriage has stopped its pointless pacing. The mechanical mustache protector rests without duty. All has grown soft, quiet, simple. Imagine now the hush of a world without striving, where there is nothing to invent, nothing to prove, nothing to fix. Just rest. Just the gentle drift of time, like a slow river carrying you into calm waters. If your eyes have not yet closed, Let them grow heavier, as if weighted by the long, tender history of human foolishness and hope. And if they are already closed, then let sleep take you the rest of the way. The inventions of the 1800s have gone still, and now so can you. Good night.